Our talk today is about storytelling, the impact of storytelling, and what you can do and what we did. So I figured it was only appropriate to start with a little bit of our story about how we came to make this podcast, the big one, Your Survival Guide. So we are KPCC. We're a news organization, we're a media organization. That's what we do. And in spring of 2018, my department, I'm Arwen Nix, the executive producer of podcasts at the station, we were brand new and we needed to introduce ourselves to our colleagues. So we did what any good coworker would do. We ordered some pizza. And we hunkered down in a conference room and we said, come, talk to us, tell us about what you do, and we'll tell you about what we do. And we did. All day, reporters and editors were streaming in and out, talking to us about their expertise. And the very last reporter to walk in that day was this guy, Jacob Margolis. I didn't know he was about to change the next year of my life. He sits down and he starts talking about space exploration, which is on his beat. He covers science. And he starts talking about climate change, passionately talking about climate change. And then he looks me dead in the face and says, very casually, well, I also cover earthquakes. And everybody in the room kind of tensed up because that's a scary word, earthquakes. But he was so casual about it. And he's like, well, you know a big one is coming, right? And I was like, yeah, sure. I totally know a big one is coming. I get it. I've lived in California on and off for my entire life. But I had never been 2 feet away from a science reporter who had just spoken that articulately about climate change and science, looking me in my face saying a big one is coming. So we talked about what that would mean. We were asking Jacob a ton of questions, and he had so much information, things that I had never heard, things I didn't know. And Jacob leaves the room, and the other producers and I keep talking about it. What if we made a podcast that told people what's going to happen in Los Angeles after a major earthquake hits? It could sound like an action movie. You've never heard a podcast that sounds like that. It could be full of science. How exciting. We have to do this. And so then my boss comes in. It's the end of the day. And we're like, Kristen, Chief Content Officer at KPCC, Kristen Muller. We say, Kristen, we have to make a podcast about a major earthquake hitting Los Angeles. And she says, that is a terrible idea. And here's where Kristen was coming from. She is not a grouch. She's a wonderful boss. But she knows that we have been covering earthquakes as a station for decades. Since we were a station, we're Southern California, of course we're covering earthquakes. She also knows that down the road from us is the LA Times, arguably some of the premier coverage of policy on earthquakes and disaster readiness. So what new was there to be done? And everyone knows a big one is coming, right? So we thought about that for a while. Kristen left, she took the wind out of our sails, and we kept talking. And we realized that there were a ton of assumptions there. We were assuming that what we had done had worked. We were assuming that people knew a big one is coming. And honestly, we were assuming that people cared at all about earthquakes, that they were thinking about it, even a little. So we decided to test those assumptions. And we went to a park. Again, we're not scientists. This wasn't a very scientific survey. We just went to a park and started asking people what they were thinking about. What are you afraid of? What's on your mind? What's stressing you out? And it's not going to surprise anyone in here. They weren't thinking about earthquakes. They weren't thinking about readiness. But when we did start talking about that, when we started talking about this major quake hitting our city and what would happen, they all said this, I just don't know where to start. They weren't ready because they didn't know how to begin to get ready. They just needed something small they could do. And then, as we're talking about that, as we're talking about the things they could do and what they wanted to know, in 45 seconds, over and over again, it went from, I just don't know where to start, to, should I get a gun? And I know, it's wild, right? It's a really extreme thing. Should I get a gun? But when we think about that, that's a question about fear. That question is really, what's going to happen to my family? How can I keep the people I love safe? Do I need to be worried? And we realized we had a challenge, right? If these people thought that the earthquake happening was going to turn Los Angeles into some version of the LA riots meets a Mad Max movie, we needed to communicate what a big earthquake would actually be like, how communities would actually respond, and give people something practical they could do. Help them understand where to start. So where did we start? We started with research. We're reporters. That's what we do. So we started interviewing people. We read thousands of pages of documents. We talked to so many scientists, seismologists, emergency responders, and emergency managers. I wouldn't be surprised if I called a couple people in this room right now. And it was at that point in the research that we came across the work of this woman, Dr. Sarah McBride. And Sarah McBride had worked with the New Zealand government for years, communicating to that region, to the people who lived there, that they were at a high seismic risk, that it was very likely that a very bad earthquake was going to happen, and it was going to be devastating. It was her job to tell people that it was coming and help them get ready. And as you know, those quakes did hit in Christchurch. And Sarah McBride found herself at Command Central, and person after person walked in the room and looked her dead in the face and said, how come nobody told us? How come nobody told us to get ready? How come nobody told us how bad this was going to be? And she thought, I did tell you. I have been telling you for years. But she didn't just get frustrated and stop. She realized there was a problem with how she was communicating. So she went back to school to study the problem. And her research ended up here. You got to tell a story. If you are going to get people to listen to you, you have to tell a story. You have to give people something that they can connect to. It can't just be fear-mongering. One of her pamphlets said, prepare now or pay later. A lot of the other literature was just full of really long acronyms that honestly weren't going to stick with people. But she found that if you can give people something they can connect to, a person they can empathize with, that it's much more likely that it'll stick, that people will think about it, and that they will act, that they will do something to prepare. So that's what we tried to do. We tried to tell people what was going to happen, give them practical information of what they could do, and wrap it up in a story. And to tell you more about how we did that, I bring you the host of the podcast, Jacob Margolis.
Thank you. So, hi, I'm Jacob. I'm KPCC science reporter and host of The Big One. And earthquakes have been like a huge part of my life since forever. Because when I was 5 in 1994, the Northridge earthquake hit. It's legitimately one of my earliest memories. I still think about it, and my parents think about it as well.
And everything changed about 4 o'clock in the morning.
That's my dad, Mark.
Literally startled awake by a freight train driving right through our bedroom.
And we both literally jumped out of bed. It was so loud. I'd never heard anything like it.
And my mom, Melissa.
The blinds that were supposed to be hanging vertical were like out horizontal. The house lifting up like 10 feet and being slammed down back onto the ground. It was everything in your house crashing onto the floor.
The refrigerator opened up and everything fell out. So your house smells like soy sauce and hoisin sauce and wine and anything is in there. And the first thing is to save your children. And Sophie was screaming. She was screaming.
To tell the story that we wanted to tell, I had to be vulnerable. I had to talk about my own personal experience of my parents, because I couldn't be this omnipotent narrator who was like wagging his finger and saying like, do better. People don't connect with that. What I needed to do, and this is the honest truth, was that like tell people that, hey, even though I've lived through an earthquake, major earthquake, my wife's lived through one, we have a baby, and also we have a house in Northridge. At the beginning of this podcast, and really almost all the way through, like halfway through, we still had no supplies for an earthquake. And the thing is, that's the case for many Southern Californians. I would say the majority, because even though they know a big one's coming, they're not necessarily doing anything about it. And I was hoping that by being vulnerable, we could take them on a journey, we can go together and possibly figure out some easy solutions for us to, kind of figure out things together. On top of that, we had to also tell them exactly what is going to happen. We had to give them some specific scenarios. And so one of those scenarios that we wanted to talk about was collapsed buildings. something that you're probably going to come across in a big enough earthquake. And so to do that, we had our fictional narrative. We had our hero encounter a collapsed building in downtown Los Angeles and really explain to us what it looks like from the outside. But we backed up that narrative with something really important, and this is one of the big key takeaways from today from us, is that we backed it up with a personal story of Anne Brower, environmental scientist in Christchurch, New Zealand. She was on a bus in 2011 in city center, and the bus was parked, and the earthquake hit, and the brick building next to her, it started to collapse.
So there was no sensory perception except for weight. So like I couldn't see anything, I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't smell anything. All I could do was feel the increasing in chunks, brick by brick, ton by ton on my left hip. And it just kept coming and coming and coming. And I remember thinking, this is not okay. This is not my life. This is not. I'm not okay with this. I do not agree with this. This is not how Anne Brower leaves this world. This is not my story. Not me. I'm not okay with this.
And then she passes out.
12 people died, and Anne was the lucky 13th. But we didn't just want to burn people out with terrifying scenarios, because a lot of time people will shut down if all you do is give them doomsday, doomsday, death, death. And that's really, really difficult. And so we also wanted to explain to people, hey, you're going to come across these small moral decisions that you're going to have to make that are amplified by this event. And one of the things that we were asked a lot about was about looting and how looting works after a natural disaster. And so what we did was we had our hero and was stand-in for the audience. Basically, let's say you have to walk across Los Angeles. Say there's no public transit, say you don't have a car, say you need to get home. But you're hungry, you're thirsty, it's been hot out, and you come across a supermarket. Supermarket doesn't have any electricity, so credit card systems are down, and you don't have any cash, you see no employees anywhere. So what do you decide to do?
At the back of the store, you see a cooler. There's not much left, so you go to grab the last 2 bottles of water. You slip on a puddle of milk. You pick yourself up and you head to the register. Shit, do I even have any cash?
When we talk about looting, we're talking about breaking into locations and stealing things. Now, mind you, we're in a different world. When this earthquake hits, and it's of that type of magnitude, you have to look at the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Philip Fontanetta. I'm a commander with the Los Angeles Police Department, and I've been with LAPD for a little over 38 years. If you see somebody walking down the street with a case of water, then that's a case of water. And it's just it's the sustainment of life. That's understandable.
It's 90 degrees out. You haven't had food since 8. But are you really just gonna walk out? Yes. Yes, you are. You grab a peanut butter protein bar, stick it in your pocket, and leave.
And then there are the big moral questions, like Arwen talked about earlier, should I get a gun? So the number of dudes I had asking that, and it was all dudes, that the whole Mad Max kind of gas can gun on the back kind of thing, it was astounding. And the assumption that they're making that we realized we needed to address this anxiety is that society is just going to crumble into chaos. And what we found and what we wanted to let them know was that, hey, turns out the person that's standing next to you might be more reliable than emergency responders who are, going to be a little bit busy after that disaster. That people inevitably, inherently, they want to help each other, especially when big stuff like a big one goes down.
You didn't notice him before, but outside the grocery store, there's a guy sitting up against the wall. He's holding his shoulder. Hey, are you okay? He doesn't answer. You crouch down and ask him again. Do you need help? He groans. It's my arm, he says. You hear a siren and look up. A fire truck's pushing through traffic, and you tell him to wait, you're gonna go get help. You run over and wave your arms and scream, stop! But they don't.
People need to understand that they might be in danger, but somebody down the road might be in worse danger.
Captain John Ignatzik is with the Los Angeles Fire Department. After the earthquake, he and other firefighters and police and sheriffs will all go into what they call earthquake mode, trying to triage the city. First, they'll check their own buildings and account for their own people. And then they do what's called a windshield survey, driving through neighborhoods, documenting how bad things are so they can let headquarters know. But it probably means that you'll see police officers and firefighters, people who can help you, just drive by and not stop.
So if we could impart on all of these gas can carrying folks that want to buy guns that maybe society won't collapse, that maybe you can prepare, maybe they'll be more inclined to go and do so. And one of the big takeaways from this whole podcast is that what we did was we showed, we didn't just tell. We showed people what a collapsed building would be like. We walked them through that scenario. We walked them through the supermarket, walked them through, the windshield surveys, just kind of driving by you while you're hurt. And the reason we did that, and one of the biggest things that we did focus on with this, is that I've been covering this for a long time. I've been covering earthquakes, as Arwen said. KPCC has been covering earthquakes. LA Times does great earthquake coverage as well. But if that coverage was effective, truly effective and resonated with people, everyone would be ready, and they're not. And so the hope was that with these personal stories, these narratives where we take you through everything, that then people would, understand that it might have some sort of resonance with their lives. And that's what producer Misha Yusuf is going to talk to you about now.
So these things are really scary. Collapsed buildings, you're trapped far away from your family, and we found that fear is not effective in compelling people to act. So I became the queen of the tips at the end of every single episode. We knew we had to answer the question, the other question that came up in the park, which was, where do I get started? So we gave our listeners practical, actionable items that they could do in order to prepare. Things like fill up your gas tank more than half full. Make sure that you drop, cover, and hold on when the earthquake hits. That you have water bottles near you at all times so that you don't starve or die of thirst. Did it work? By journalistic standards and normal standards of success, we got a New Yorker review. We had our picture in the paper. And 1 million people listened to the podcast. But the real impact was that people did something. We heard from hundreds of listeners about questions that they had about the earthquake, but even more than that, we heard from those who were doing something to prepare. People who were putting together water bottles, replenishing their earthquake kits and thinking about retrofitting for the first time. People who were talking to their family members about their plan for the earthquake and downloading the Shake Alert app. And now I'm a producer on a totally different podcast, but people were so impacted by the big one that we're still hearing from listeners about what they did. And I'd be remiss being in Hollywood if I didn't say that even celebrities were preparing, which is important because they have huge circles of influence. People who follow them are more likely to prepare because they prepared. And this was all intentional. We're public radio. We wanted to compel people to act.
So just a final note that I want to say. When we questioned our assumptions, we had to face a very sobering reality. That all the coverage we had done might not be working. That as professional storytellers, we might not be doing a good job telling the story in the way that it's going to actually resonate with people. It wasn't until we could face that reality and think, maybe we're doing it wrong, that we could improve on it a little bit. And I'm not going to say that we got it completely right. I think that there's still room for improvement in how we report on disasters, on telling this story. But I will say that these tweets, these emails, these letters from around the world are still coming in. And it's not just people in LA getting ready for an earthquake. It's people in tornado regions. It's people who are at high risk for flooding, who said they listened to this podcast and talked to their family about making a plan. They started to get ready. Just before we came out on stage, I got another email from another person. It's really incredible. And I think that the reason it's happening is because we just really focused on who we were talking to. We told a story that wasn't for us. It was about the listener. We told the story they needed to hear with them in mind. And I think that the work that you do is so important. And I think that the way that you came to that work is your story. And I encourage you to include your story of your work in how you communicate this. And I really do believe that if you do that, it can make an impact. Thank you so much.